Hey there, listener. Have you ever gone through an experience in your life and while you're in it, you're wondering what could possibly be the blessing in this? How could this possibly turn out good? Right? I'm sure we've all been there. I'm going to share with you today an experience in my life involving a meth house, running my first 3-day retreat, two music festivals, and what finally got me to move to Buffalo, New York after 5 years of talking and talking about it with my husband. So stay tuned. Every day there is a forgetting, and every moment there is the possibility of remembering. Remembering who you truly are, awakening to your body, to the inner world, to the experience of being alive. Here is where you find the beauty, the joy, and here is where you free your soma. I'm your host, Aimee Takaya. I'm here to help you move from pain to power, from tension to expansion, and ultimately from fear to love. Hey everybody, I'm coming to you now from Buffalo, New York, whispering into my microphone at 11:30 p.m. in my fluffy purple bathrobe and my winter hat that I am wearing inside my house. One, because I just got out of the shower and I have wet hair, and two, because we are experiencing sub-zero temperatures this week in Buffalo. Buffalo is not a place that I ever intended to move in my life. Although I think that there is a 14-year-old girl in me that would like really enjoy that I'm living in Ani DeFranco's hometown, because I think that's where I first became aware of Buffalo, New York was when I was 14 and listening to her music, right? But aside from that, how did I end up here? How did I end up living in Buffalo, New York after building my business and my community in California? Now I'm all the way out here in this snowy lake town, right? Well, it's a story that some of you who are listening may know pieces of it, especially if you're my clients and my friends who knew me during that time, like knew what was going on with me during that time. This story takes place in August, September 2023. So, yeah, it's about a year and a half ago that all this went down. And I just want to say that I have been thinking about telling you guys this story on the podcast for a while. I kind of realized, like, probably a year ago that this story needed to be told, but I just needed to let it marinate more, I think, before I was ready to serve it up to y'all. So let's just say there's a lot more backstory here that I will be getting into, but I'm going to start in August of 2023. We were told by our landlord previously, I guess I'm not starting in August 2023, I'm starting like 3 months before August 2023. We were told by our landlord up in Crestline, California, that he was going to sell the house we were living in. And we weren't really ready to buy it. And we did a lot of like looking around for things, but honestly, we weren't being that aggressive about it. I was kind of just hoping that something would like arrive on my doorstep, right? That was kind of like the mode I was in, was like, let's just let things come to me. And I want to find like this special, perfect situation that I would never have, thought of. I want it to show up on my doorstep. And, we looked at some places in Joshua Tree, but I was living in this mindset where I really wanted to like have cheap rent. Like I didn't want to be spending like massive amounts of money on rent in California. And so, a lot of the places that we were looking at just didn't feel like they had enough space in them because I really wanted to live in a space that it was large enough for me to have events and community experiences, right? Because the house that we had been living in, the house that was for sale, was so tiny and small and like awkwardly shaped little cabin built in the 1920s in the woods. Loved it, but it wasn't really an ideal space for holding gatherings and experiences. So eventually, something just arrives to me through a friend we had up in Crestline. He told us about this house that he knew about that was empty and had just been sitting there empty for like a year. And he knew the landlord, and the landlord was, according to him, like a really chill guy. And he got us in touch with this guy. We went and saw the house. He told us kind of up front that like the people who had lived in it before had kind of trashed the place. But, he really believed that the house was like a good house and had good bones and he was fixing it up. But, he wasn't like actively renting it out because he was still in the process of fixing it up. Well, we saw the house and we kind of fell in love with it because it was one of these weird, kind of cool old mountain houses with like a vaulted ceiling and a front deck and a big backyard. And we just felt like it was a really good spot and it was really close by to our other house. So, like, moving wouldn't be like this big ordeal necessarily. Like, I mean, it's already always an ordeal when you move, but we thought, okay, like, this is something that is manageable. Like, it's not that far from where we already live. It was minutes to walk down to the lake, right? A beautiful lake in Crestline, California. So we said yes. And he gave us this insane price that we were like, wow, we get this three-bedroom house for $1,250 a month because it's a fixer-upper and the guy knows it. And we are going to help him fix it up. And it's going to be this little project house that we're going to do, right? And we were really thrilled. We thought we had hit the jackpot. Did you know that your muscles are holding on to thoughts, memories, and feelings? If you have a tight neck or back, you're not just getting old, you're experiencing a buildup of tension from the life you've lived. Most people don't know this, but there is a part of your brain that can reverse and prevent chronic tension. When you relax your muscles, you not only move better and regulate your nervous system, but you also free yourself from the grip the past has over your body. So you can live with freedom, confidence, and enjoy your life now. How does that sound? Join me, Aimee Takaya, and discover what my clients are raving about at youcanfreeyoursoma.com. And then you kind of can guess what happened because I already mentioned methamphetamine at the beginning of this podcast. But we ended up finding out, like smoking some weed. Like I wasn't thinking hard drugs. So it was pretty shocking to me. And like I had already known that the house had like strange energy, which was another red flag that I had been overlooking because of the great price point and the fact that I just wanted to see what I wanted to see, right? And that night, that day after finding out that it had been contaminated by meth, and the guy really told me like how much the people were smoking there and that they were in it, like really hard in it while they were there. Like it was like a crack house kind of situation, right? I was like very disturbed because now things that were kind of a little weird to me about the house were like alarming. And I started seeing it with totally different eyes. I didn't just see it as like a little bit of a fixer-upper house that, the last tenants had not been so kind to. I saw it as like a space where lots of tense, kind of probably pretty insane things had occurred. If you can imagine like a house full of meth heads who are really high on meth. And I gotta say, like force of suggestion, whatever it is, becoming aware of another layer of like your surroundings, right? I could not sleep that night. We stayed in the house. I didn't want to, but we just did because we didn't really have a plan of where else to go. And honestly, we were all kind of in shock. But we slept in like the airiest, most open part of the house. And I was spooked the entire night. And then, of course, I was thinking, is my nervous system being affected by this? I didn't know enough about methamphetamine to like know what to do, right? But I basically was very clear the next morning that like my son and like I didn't want my husband to stay there either, but I was like, we can't stay here. Like this is a hard no. Like I can't be here. And for those of you who like have ever been to like one of these little mountain towns, right? They have like weird stairs. Like when you go up to a house, you might like walk up like three awkward flights of stairs because everything's built on like an incline on like a hillside. So this house was like that. It was built on this incline and like the stairs to get up were like awkward four flights of stairs just to get to the front door. And my husband had laboriously carried all of our belongings and our stuff. Like moving into this house, had been a task. And we had not hired movers, right? We were doing everything like low budget. And my husband was like not wanting to believe what I knew from like my nervous system's reaction, from like the guy next door. Because there's one more piece to this that was a really big red flag that made me believe every single thing that the next door neighbor said, which was that in like the downstairs bedroom, there was this weird smell that I could not get over. It was like this like floral, fake perfumey, but like rotty smell. And I had not smelled it before because whenever I had been in the house before, the landlord had all the windows open and he was painting the walls and then he was refinishing the hardwood floors. And so there was just a lot of smells in the space. But this weird floral smell, like I could not like be in that space very long and we couldn't figure out what it was or where it was coming from. But there was this whole like negotiation with the space while we tried to figure out whether we could live there, although I knew I couldn't at this point, right? But I had to like prove that my suspicions and the neighbor's intel was correct. And I gotta say, like, I moved through so many emotions. And looking back on it, I mean, even at the time, I was like really blown away by how much I was letting myself feel about what was happening. Like, I was just having these moments where I would just like let myself cry and not even like dramatically cry, not like sobbing my eyes out, but just like let sadness fall out of my face, you know, or let my worry be known to my husband, like let my fear be like palatable, you know? Whereas I think in the past, like who I was before, when stuff would happen that was really intense, like I think my go-to reaction would have just been like anger and like bitchiness. And instead, in this circumstance, like I really was getting in touch with like my grief because I really had wanted what I had wanted. I had wanted this big, well, it wasn't really that big, but I wanted this larger space so that I could throw community events, so that I could bring people into my home, so that I could host things. You know, I'd wanted my son to live in this beautiful little town, like a few minutes walk from the lake. Like I wanted what I wanted. And I also wanted like cheap rent. I wanted, you know, to find and be the exception to the rule that I could somehow find this Easter egg or unicorn of a house, right? And I thought I had found it. And so I went through like so much grief over the bubble being burst and also like shame in having wanted to be special, shame in having wanted to have cheap rent, shame in living in like this poverty mindset, shame in general of like having been poor at different times in my life and not been able to afford certain things. You know, I felt shame about like being kind of a beggar or something who was trying to get around like the rules of how things work and like get the hookup or something, right? So there was like a lot of pain that I was experiencing during this period of time. And it was strange because we had all this travel planned. That's why we wanted to move in August, right? We scrambled to like move in August because in September it was like so much was happening. So we move into this house. The day after we move in, I realize I can't live there. My husband is freaking out because he doesn't know where we're going to put all this stuff. We're just sitting in this house with like piles of stuff. And I'm like saying, we can't be here, right? We don't have a plan of where we're going to go. And we have all this stuff planned for September. The first thing was actually traveling to Buffalo to here to go to a wedding. And so we did that. And while we were in Buffalo in the wedding, I kept doing like all the research about the meth house. I kept like learning about like you know, how to test the walls and all that stuff. And by the time we got back, the testing kits that I had ordered from this reputable company that like a housing inspector recommended. Like I did the whole thing. I wanted to be like really, you know, clear on what was happening. I didn't want any room for like error on my part to prove that this was real, right? By the time we got back, I had the tests and I tested the walls. And by the way, little meth lesson for all y'all who don't know much about meth and the impact of meth. Let me just say, if I was a meth smoker and I was sitting in this room, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see, right, wearing my fluffy purple robe with these curtains, and I were to smoke meth just once in this environment, some of that smoke, well, it's not really smoke, it's vapor, would soak into the robe, would soak into the curtains, right? And then someone else who wore this robe or touched those curtains might receive some of that meth product into their nervous system through their skin or through their breathing. Now, imagine that the person who is smoking this doesn't just smoke it once, but smokes it multiple times a day every day for years. What happens is that the vapor soaks into the walls. It soaks into the wood fibers, into the drywall. And when I started researching this, there's like very little you can do to rehab a meth house, of a certain level of contamination, other than literally remove all the drywall and take it down to the studs and replace everything. And we're not even mentioning like the air vac system or whatever the heating system in the house that has to be cleansed as well, right? So this level of research that I was doing was just further having me realize that I could not live in this house, right? Obviously. And when we got back, I tested the walls. Oh, and I also learned that there's a certain amount of meth contamination that is allowed in a home, and it varies from state to state what's allowed in a home, right? That, oh, the people who lived here before smoked meth, but they didn't smoke it that much. And so there's only some residue in the house. And the homeowners scrubbed the walls and painted. And when they test it, it only comes up this amount of meth, right? That's left over. Well, in California, it's 1.5 micrograms per cubic feet or something like that, right? It's like this 1.5 micrograms. That doesn't sound like much, except that that amount that is allowed is 3 times higher than what's allowed in other states. Or, California and a few other states allow more meth residue in a home to consider it still habitable than other states, 3 times the amount, right? So this was disturbing also. So I got a testing kit that was going to test for like a higher amount of meth. It could test up to 3 micrograms. And so I tested the walls, and it was 3 micrograms or higher. It wouldn't go past 3, so it couldn't tell me how high the meth residue actually was in these walls, but it was twice what's allowed in California homes. And so I had my evidence there, and I presented it to the landlord, and we basically said, like, you need to pay us back, like, obviously for the rent and the deposit, but also for our moving costs, also for my mattress that has been sitting in that stinky room downstairs, leaning against the wall, and I don't feel comfortable sleeping on that mattress after it's been soaking in that space for who knows how long amount of time to soak in residue. Like, I actually like contacted like a meth testing company and asked them if I could like send them a little piece of my mattress. That was the only way they'd be able to tell whether my mattress was contaminated, was like send them a little sample and they would test the fibers of it, but then I'd have to cut, into this like expensive nice mattress that I had like financed at one point, right? Ugh, such an ordeal, such an ordeal. And then, okay, that happens, right? I test the walls. We have to move everything out and into a storage unit. So we did. We moved all of our stuff out into a storage unit. And then I literally had no time to do anything else because I was about to do a festival, right, in Oregon. So this is what my September looked like. Go to a wedding in Buffalo, about a week and a half off, drive up to Oregon for a festival in Bend, right? Which is like a 12-hour drive. And then 12 hours back, right? Then host my first 3-day retreat on Mount Baldy in California. Then about like a week off, and then go do Joshua Tree Music Festival as a presenter and a body worker. That was like 3 straight weeks of work that I had already lined up that I was planning on doing. And all of a sudden, I'm homeless. All of a sudden, I don't know where I'm going to live or what I'm going to do or whether my child has been exposed to methamphetamine, right? Yeah, talk about like a really crazy time. And the stress that I was experiencing was extraordinary. Luckily, I had really, really great tools, right? I had tools to reduce the pain and tension that was going on in my body that had gotten lit up from all the fear and stress of moving and then stress of a meth house. And so, there were days that I was having an extraordinary amount of pain in my legs because that's where it tends to show up in me, and I wasn't slowing down enough to have it go away. I was like continuing to lift boxes and move my body and do things. And, I would lay down and be literally in so much pain in my legs. My legs would just be screaming at me, or the bottoms of my feet. And I would go through a series of more advanced somatic movements that I knew were going to target where the pain was actually coming from in my body. Because it's strange, like some of the pain that we experience in our bodies is not happening like at the place where we feel it. It is referred pain from a different area, right? So in my case, it was referred pain from my sacrum being twisted that was causing me to have this like weird numbness in my thighs and this awful, like aching, sore, miserable pain in the bottoms of my feet. And I knew that it was referred pain from my twisted sacrum because when I did stuff with my feet and I did stuff with my thighs, the pain didn't go away. But when I did this series of movements to untwist my sacrum and bring balance back to my pelvis, then the pain went away and it would go away pretty powerfully, right? But then as soon as my stress would start up again, as soon as I was moving my body so continuously without rest and reeling and worrying and stressing about what was going on, right? The pain would start up again, and it was up to me like to slow down, right? And feel my feelings and not just bulldoze my way through the day to regulate that, to regulate the stress in my nervous system, right? And I have one of those bodies that complains a lot. It's part of why I'm so good at what I do and also why I've been like my biggest, I'm my own client because my nervous system and my body is quite sensitive and complains a lot. And I didn't really, when I was younger, I didn't really know how to deal with that. I just sort of learned to ignore it. And I had a very high threshold for pain because I was ignoring a lot of pain that was going on all the time, right? But now, I would say I don't have as high a threshold for pain because I don't tolerate pain for that long in my body. I do something about it. I do my somatic movements. I take the time to unwind my nervous system. I feel my feelings and I don't just like avoid them, avoid them, avoid them. I know what things help soothe and calm my nervous system and what things activate it, right? And so during this experience, like, God, if I didn't have somatics, like I would have just been like insane. Like I would have just been so, so, so stressed out of my mind. But I was successful. I ran my 3 day retreat very successfully. The people who came had life-changing experiences. I managed all of the staff and everything well. The festivals went really well. I made some really beautiful connections in Oregon, right? And I also, made some wonderful connections in Joshua Tree. And from the outside, I don't think that anybody could really see what incredible stress I was going through in my personal world, right? There were definitely friends that I confided in and let know what was going on. But I just didn't really feel like safe to talk about it at the time because there was so much going on in me about it. Like I mentioned before, the grief and the shame and the frustration and the fear, and the uncertainty. And so then my husband brought up moving to Buffalo. We'd just been there, right, at a wedding before we moved out of the meth house. And, I have to admit that, like, while we were here in Buffalo for the wedding, I was kind of looking around and going, oh, it is actually quite quaint here and quite beautiful. Oh, there actually is kind of some cool things going on, right? And we'd honestly been talking about it for a few years because my husband is originally from this area, and I'd always resisted for different reasons, but it finally felt like, okay, we don't have rent, we don't have a lease, we don't have a living situation lined up. Maybe this is the time to take like a big leap into a whole new reality. And so we started the process. We agreed on it in September, October, and then started the process to have us move over here. And so my husband came over in November of 2023, got a job, found us a place, and by March of last year, we finally moved in to our new house, new space. And we're renting, but it's really, 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 really nice to have our own living space after all of that because it was August that we moved out of the place we were living into the meth house. Then it was September that all the confusion and fear and craziness was going on, and my husband and my son were staying with my dad. And then while my husband was out here in Buffalo setting everything up, we lived on a pad in my dad's practice room for like 6 months without a lot of privacy or most of our stuff, living out of suitcases, putting our stuff away and putting the pad away every day so that I could do sessions with clients, so my dad could do sessions with clients, and I guess it's only easy for me to talk about all of that, like now that it's over, because while I was in it, I really had a hard time like seeing the blessing of it. It was like a struggle. It was just hard and a struggle. Now I look back on it and I realize that being able to manage those difficult emotions and those things that were coming up with me and to get in touch with my shame of being poor and my shame of not having, what other people have and, getting in touch with like the beliefs that existed in me that said that was somehow my fault, that I was somehow like just like a bad person or a trash person or whatever like mean thing my brain was saying to try to protect me or something, right? Getting in touch with that was actually very healing. It created a lot more compassion in myself for myself because of my somatic way of handling it, because of the way I let myself feel all the things as I was feeling them and be with the feelings. It didn't make it any easier to like share it with somebody or like go on my podcast and talk about it, but I see the value of it now. I see the value of being with my feelings and going through that experience. And now, if I'm totally honest, like the home that I'm living in Buffalo is exactly what I wanted. I just got to run my first day retreat here and share somatics with people, share delicious food with people in my home. I want to have more group events and community events. And, my son had like a movie night and we had like three families over here to watch a movie. I just, I wanted what I wanted at the time back then, and I was unwilling to see that maybe what I wanted was absolutely possible, but just would take more effort and more work than, what I wanted it to be like. And I invite you to consider that as you're hearing my story. If like, you've ever bought into these like, oh, it has to be like easy, like if it's for you, it's just going to be easy and easy and easy. I'm here to say that sometimes it's hard and it's not necessarily like bad hard. It can be good hard, right? It can be like effort that is about getting where you need to go. Like think about effortful things that are also pleasant. There's plenty of effortful things that are also pleasant, right? Like sex can be kind of effortful and it's very pleasant, right? But also like planning an event, planning a birthday party, or writing a book, or any number of things, right? It's not a sign that it's not for you if it's hard work. If you have in mind the vision of what you want to do, or what you want to have, or what you want to be, putting in the work is actually so nutritious to that outcome, to the creation of that opportunity or that way of being. That's part of what I love about somatics is that I'm not giving people a magic wand to just like poof, your back's better, right? It's not just going to happen in this snap your fingers instant and they're enlightened, for the rest of their lives, right? Like this is a practice and it's something that you learn and you get better at the more that you do it. It's a skill that does take some effort in the beginning to learn something new, to learn a new way of moving, to learn a new way of being. And when I am in my house, when I'm experiencing like my pretty little office space or my living room and paying the rent that I pay here, which is definitely not 12.50 a month. There's gratitude in that I get to have this because I know what it was like to not have it. And I try to remind myself of that every time I'm irritated with cleaning this 1,700 square foot space. I'm like, oh, but you wanted this. You wanted a larger space that you could make beautiful, that you could make messy, that you could do what you wanted to do in it. Remember that, doll. Remember that, love. Like, you're getting what you wanted. It's just that sometimes getting what you want is an effort, and it doesn't have to be like the worst effort. In fact, somatics made it effortless compared to probably what I would have gone through without having these really powerful tools to regulate my nervous system and turn off my pain and process my feelings, right? So we don't have any effort-free life. We don't have effort-free experiences, right? But we can make them more effortless with skills, with help, with guidance, right? Whew. So, yeah, that's the story. It's an interesting thing. Like renting the meth house changed my life. And it also opened me to deeper compassion for myself and other people who are struggling financially and feeling shame over their situation and shame over their poverty and shame over their circumstances and making themselves wrong and making themselves the problem when in fact sometimes we are a victim of circumstance and chance. And this happened to be where I was, and what showed up for me, and how did I manifest this, through my beliefs that like, it should be easy and I shouldn't have to like pay X amount of dollars in rent, right? Like there's all kinds of ways that I may have manifested this experience to learn something, right? Perhaps I'm not totally bought into that idea all the time, but I'm willing to entertain it, right? Because in the long run, like post all of that, I do feel a sense that I learned something here. I do feel a sense that it enriched my life to go through all that and to go through all that while running a business and fulfilling on my mission, which I certainly could not have done without the tools that I teach, right? So it was another opportunity to like practice what I preach. So, as you're listening to this story, like, first of all, you've learned some things about methamphetamine and houses, right? And contamination. And also, perhaps you can think a little bit about the insane things that you might have experienced or might be going through that while you're in it are just going to seem like they suck, right? And while you're in it, just seem incredibly uncomfortable. But I want to offer that if you have tools to allow yourself to feel all of the feelings that are coming up and become more soft and compassionate towards yourself, these painful, hard experiences can grow your soul and they can grow your faith and they can grow your heart in a huge way. So, those are my pearls of wisdom. Yeah. And you're going to hear more stories like this from me, from my life, because I've actually lived a very interesting, unusual life. And I feel like I've been holding out on you guys on the podcast, not sharing this stuff. And some of it, if I'm totally going to be frank with you, is like, beliefs that I've had or fears that I've had about being my full self with my audience, because maybe I've had some idea that like I can't be goofy and funny and like weird or whatever, and also be deep and profound and like professional, right? But I'm starting to just like realize that like that, if it's a thing that I was carrying, like whatever. Maybe that's just a thing that I was carrying and it's not real. And it's actually fine to be like a goofball and like a silly person one moment and then say something meaningful and heartfelt and compassionate the next moment. Like maybe I don't have to like try to cut out all of my glibness or cut out all of my mannerisms or my silliness, or my peculiarities, right? Or my shameful stories of renting a meth house, right? I can lean into those things and I can bring you my full energy and my full self because honestly, that's what my clients get. They get my full self. And that's part of why we have such awesome relationships. And I have so many return clients and I have this awesome community that has been growing is because I do let myself show up as my full being and I invite other people to do that too. So just know that this is, this along with the two previous solo casts that you've heard, it's me opening up to you all more and sharing more of my experience, my living somatic experience through my stories and my life. And I hope you guys enjoy it. So, if you found something about this story helpful, or maybe you have your own like weird story of like renting a house or having everything just like crumble and fall apart, whatever has been going on for you, I would love to connect. So follow me on Instagram at Aimee Takaya. Share this podcast, follow my podcast, leave a review, all the love. I can use all the love to share these stories and share this message with people. And yeah, stay in touch because this is an ongoing conversation and I'm here for it. I'm here for these conversations and these stories. So yeah.
Hey there, friend.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I would love to hear your thoughts. Follow me on Instagram at Aimee Takaya and send me a DM about this episode. I'd like to thank you for being part of this somatic revolution. And if you'd like to support the podcast and help more people learn about somatics, consider leaving a review or a rating. And finally, if you'd like to have the experience of relief in your tight hips or back and learn to understand what your body is really saying to you, visit youcanfreeyoursoma.com. I can't wait to share with you what is truly possible. Bye for now.